Welcome back to another episode of Customers Who Click. Today, I've got another super interesting topic lined up. My guest, James Denker, is the Director of Partnerships at Imagination Media. We're going to be talking about unified commerce. In short, this involves linking up pretty much every aspect of a business so the data can be available for use anywhere. Whether it's customer service related, fulfillment, in-store activity, whatever, the idea is that all this data gets properly linked together so the business can provide a much more accurate and engaging customer experience. Hi, James. Thanks for joining me today. Could you introduce yourself a bit? Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and why you're doing what you do at the moment.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so my name's James Denker. I've been in technology in various capacities in the past 11 years. So it started back in my time with IBM, where I was a consultant, kind of like a technical consultant, if you will, for AT&T, on doing a bit of digital transformation to legacy systems into microservices, moving all different types of software development life cycles, project management, sales, RFPs, marketing, you name it. I was tagged to it, wearing a bunch of hats there. And then I moved into e-commerce about 4 years ago, leveraging marketing technologies such as, omnichannel, email, SMS, push notifications for a company called Digital. Then I moved over into the review space, leveraging a partnership channel, which is where I really kind of currently stay, and in leveraging, this kind of like B2B model, if you will, of leveraging relationships to drive, a joint brand narrative on what these solutions may look like and how that can ultimately, drive engagement and conversions on customers' websites with a review platform. So you can imagine loyalty, email, such. And then last year, I moved over to an e-commerce global system integrator and marketing agency called Imagination Media, where I've leveraged my domain expertise in the marketing space to help drive all different types of value to the clients, within that role.
Awesome. Sounds great. I think I worked with Digital, although they were called something else before, weren't they?
There's .mailer, right?
.mailer, yeah. I worked with them. It must be like 10 years ago now or something. Quite right at the start of my career. I'm quite intrigued about this idea of unified commerce that you kind of brought up with me before the podcast. So do you want to kind of tell us a bit about that? What is unified commerce? Where does it fit in with things?
Yeah, so when people talk about unified commerce, there are some areas of I would say misconception, but holistically at a 30,000 foot view, it's really an abstract idea. And it's about describing the act of combining product and customer data and how that relates to retailers. So ultimately, they can provide a personalized experience across all of their channels. I think, maybe the two terms that get intertwined is unified commerce and omnichannel, but unified is kind of the parent to it, where you're collecting all that data. And I guess an example would be like, if we're going to take email, for example, they have these omni-channel experiences, email, push, SMS, but the next level of that email service platform would be something called like a content data platform, where you're leveraging all Google Analytic data, behavioral data on your website, email data, the segmentation that comes from it, and all the analytics tied into that backend. So you can ultimately align with your brand narrative to copywriting, branding, content, and putting it into a workflow that resonates with engaged and potentially non-engaged audiences.
Okay, cool. So it's kind of about taking the data from basically everywhere, combining it to one, and then allowing you to really use that data to personalize the experiences.
Totally. Historically, going back, maybe even before I was getting into the IT space 11 years ago, there was just a lot of siloed technology out there, single centralized platforms, stuff wasn't chatting with each other. So like middleware came into this huge play, and then it even got bigger than middleware. So if you're talking e-commerce, people want a mobile commerce, order fulfillment, inventory management, customer relationship management, also known as CRMs, and all these different technologies to integrate into a single platform. And it really kind of rids themselves of those siloed internal channels that are operating in such a manner,
Yeah. Well, would it be kind of reasonably accurate to suggest that like Zapier is kind of trying to do that? So as a tool which breaks down a bit of those barriers and helps link up other tools without them having to create their own integrations.
I'd say they were kind of on the cutting edge of just trying to, leveraging data sets. And, here at Imagination Media, we've leveraged tools such as ETLs, kind of like extract, transform, and loading. And that was, one of those data mapping solutions. And that's essentially what, Zapier was doing, which I would imagine to be a 2.0 of that, where if you want to take a first name, a last name, and an email address from an order right out of your OMS system that was processed by the e-commerce platform, and you want to map that to Klaviyo, for example, or .digital, for example, for your ESP, you if it didn't have an API integration, you could leverage a Zapier, or you could leverage an ETL, or you could leverage APIs for that transaction. So that was kind of like the start of, this concept of unified commerce in its infancy. Yeah.
Do you see it as like there is one big central point that everything should be pushing data to, and then can also pull data from? Or is it more around, it does go from kind of the e-commerce platform to Klaviyo? Or should it go from e-commerce platform to central data point and then to Klaviyo? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd imagine if you're leveraging something like a content data platform like a CDP, you'd be pulling everything into a hub. And in a way, you could consider an email platform, an e-commerce solution, an OMS technology, pulling in, setting and getting and pushing and pulling all that data as, CDP is kind of being the hub in a lot of ways. So there is a concept of kind of like the nucleus of, the ecosystem. And you could view, CDP in that light, where it wouldn't really matter as long as the data points are set up correctly. You need to have that central hub of where that data comes from. So whether it comes from ecom, CDP, then it goes out to your ESP for your push notification for your transactional email that you purchase something. I would say your CDP would be your hub for that type of approach.
And at the start, you mentioned some misconceptions. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, there's some misconceptions, when you're talking about maybe like an omnichannel, which is essentially many different digital and physical channels, so that customer experience really is lower friction points, lower the barrier of entry to make it ultimately seamless. And that's in one bucket, right? And if we're going to talk about unified commerce, it's really a bit different, because you're removing and leaving out a section of data, because it's really designed to ensure those systems are connected and communicating and kind of moving in this fluid, free state, right? If you compare the two, it's really because omnichannel is held together with some of these rudimentary processes and kind of complexities in terms of how those integrations are structured, and the strategy is kind of surrounding data silos and how it kind of slows up efficiency. And as you can imagine, those things can grow quite expensive. And then on the other front, you take and look at unified commerce. Really, the goal of it is to have mid-size or small companies or enterprises, everyone use this, because it's a strategy to provide businesses that single source of guidance or truth, or like that nucleus that I was mentioning, to help drive that efficiency and decrease barriers of entry and decrease that friction and increase engagement across those customers channels. And to wrap it up, it's really more than just simply connecting different systems as omnichannel does. Really the unified commerce, macroeconomic is looking at that centralized platform to have that consistency and accuracy in terms of that data across all of the channels that you're utilizing. So hopefully that can put omnichannel in a bucket and then unified commerce in a bucket. So there's no misconceptions along those lines,
Yeah, I think I've got you. So like omnichannel is kind of still each channel doing its own thing, but pushing that data in if it's kind of required elsewhere. Whereas unified commerce is more, those are all like entry areas for the data, but then it goes to a central system which actually really owns it and therefore allows that data to be kind of freely used by anything whenever it needs it.
Definitely. Unified commerce is definitely like the parent to, to everything really online.
Yeah. Awesome. So before, when we spoke last, actually, we talked a bit about kind of marketing pop-ups actually and in-store. Not in-store. I guess the death of in-store a little bit, but how there might still be opportunities with pop-ups.
That's interesting. With this concept of pop-ups, like one of my partners, Klarna, for breaking up payments, right? Yep. To increase the average order value for consumers that wanted to buy something, recently did one. And I think it really just helps on, the P&L, statements at the end of the day, because, there's a lot of different things happening. So for example, traditionally a lot of brands would want a flagship store in New York, right? And they don't even care if they lose money. They want it for the brand awareness and they want it for the marketing, right? But if you're tied into these like $20, $30, $40, $50,000 a month leases for 4 or 5 years, that could have a substantial impact, to your bottom line. So, reinventing, native advertising in the form of, brick and mortar is kind of evolving in a sense of, pop-ups. So, I believe I was in New York a couple of years ago and they had one for, I believe it was for Nordstrom. And they did this experimentation where it's more of an experience. You could go in, you could have a drink, you could go in and try something on. You can go in and get a shave, you can get a haircut. And it's kind of like this inclusive experience where it increases people time there. That would be the equivalent of like maybe a bounce rate to your website, right? If you can get someone in the store longer, get them more engaged and give them more of a personalized experience, like having a stylist help you with that, they're going to end up, putting something and filling their bag up. So, that while that, that term, maybe like retail apocalypse that you may be kind of floating around, there's this concept of expansion and contraction, around that term, maybe that was coined maybe 10, 11 years ago. But as this physical footprint evolves, we're really taking a look at, how advanced development, virtual implementation, and how you can have a deeper commitment to this omnichannel experience. So hopefully it kind of gives you a little bit of context of where people are, kind of putting their investments and how to minimize the exposure of long-term contracts as it relates to, physical brick and mortar presence.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously seeing the same thing here. Loads of stores closing, especially with the year that we've had. And yeah, we have a similar place like Oxford Street. It's generally where the flagship stores are. I doubt there are many at all that actually make money from that store. But it is just a store. There's nothing special about it. Like, Primark is there. It is just a store. There is no they call it a flagship store, but you go around these stores and there's no difference to another store. I guess it's just a flagship store because it's on Oxford Street. But they're really expensive to run. They're really high value leases. But yeah, these pop-ups are definitely more interesting, and I suppose brands can be more flexible. So if they do go down the route of that experience, like you mentioned, it's only going to cost them a lot of money for maybe a week, and so they know that cost. If it works really well, that's great. Maybe they can do it again sometime. But if it doesn't work well, they've tested it, they've tried it, they can move on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely kind of can align to that, because it's like everything's all about kind of like what's the latest fashion trend, right? Like what's the latest thing to do in a city, right? And it kind of aligns with that narrative of just, that urban environment, and people always want to see what's next, what's hot, what's trending. And if you put something on a timeline, right? I think Sweetgreens did it in New York, like a super popular, salad shop with like a new location, but they only did it for a super short period of time. It generates interest, it generates buzz, it generates noise. And if it can decrease the overall, cost of this implementation, it has these huge spikes of engagement. So, to a certain extent, at least at a micro level, you can gain that exposure that brand's looking for that native advertising component without exposing yourself to, a financial burden of a long-term lease. And, you could even leverage, staging companies and stuff like that as it relates to the storefront, and not even purchase the inventory, the furnitures that you would need for that store. And it could go in a bunch of different ways as it relates to POS, OMS, loyalty, but we can get into that a bit later. But it's quite interesting to see, especially during the times of, the past 12, 13 months of COVID. I think we're just starting to see that inflection point where people are starting to come back into the stores. So brands are currently really thinking about, how they're going to, leverage that brick and mortar storefront, as things begin to open up.
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely had our fair share of decent pop-ups in London. And obviously they create a load of buzz for a brand, and that must have an effect on online sales as well. Particularly for those people who don't get to go to it, but they might hear about it, see it, and go, okay, I'll go and check out that site. I remember, I think it was In-N-Out Burger came here once. It was something like that. It was an American fast food brand that was here for about a week in London, one store, and that was it. So, but that's one that I find odd, because it doesn't seem like there was a long-term plan with that, like at all. It was, and I can't see how it's really a marketing stunt, because there is no store now. So unless it was just a bit of a market research piece, but
it's funny. It's quite interesting because, my time at Trustpilot was kind of like the inverse of that, where Trustpilot's really well known in the UK. It's, you see it on the side of, buses, you see them, in all types of organic and native advertising, as well as paid. But, over the past 4 to 5 years, they've done, a pretty decent job of expanding themselves in the US. And while I'm not on the board of, In-N-Out Burger, but I think I resonate with your statement, where it's definitely kind of like, we want to test the audience. We want to test the engagements of a new segment and a new vertical and a new demographic to see what the engagement is, to see if we would actually want to expand in that territory.
I mean, I'm sure they thought it through, and they did have a plan with this, but you've got to be careful that you don't misunderstand that data, because obviously that pop-up was rammed. I think there were queues basically all the time, super popular. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if they launched over here, it would do well. Although we've got Shake Shack and Five Guys, and those are both doing really, really well here. So, but In-N-Out Burger is just California, isn't it?
Predominantly in the West, I'd imagine. But, I think that's kind of where they started and progressively worked their way. But yeah, I mean, there's different chains that, have larger segments in specific geographies in the US. Even down here in South Florida, there's different segments in like supermarkets, for example, as there is in the Northeast where I'm originally from. But it's interesting to see how these brands are leveraging brick and mortar retail and testing out these market segments. And to your point, you got to do multiple tests, to ensure that there's a common trend among that data. Because marketing is a bit of just planning, testing, executing, learning, and reiterating essentially.
So, what are some of the mistakes brands make then? I guess if they're running both in-store and online experiences, either big or just common mistakes you see where maybe things aren't linked up quite as well as they could be.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to this concept of unified commerce and what technologies you're leveraging. It's one thing to have native brand awareness where you're doing a pop-up store, you're going to invest a ton of money in brick and mortar just to get the eyeballs on it, to have that brand, acknowledgement from a potential customer. But what a lot of things that I'm starting to see is leveraging unified commerce and the technologies that are available today, such as like teamwork commerce. So an example would be not leveraging your POS to be operating on the same order management system. So you could leverage that data and having unique coupon codes that you could extract in store as well as online. Like I was literally just working with a pretty sizable jewelry brand, and they have an issue where you can't leverage your points in store. You can only redeem them online. And while they only have a couple stores for those 10 to 15, 20,000 customers, that's not a great experience, right? So really harmonizing those platforms and how they can work together. But I would say loyalty is a huge piece that needs to get adopted, not only from the website and leveraging those unique coupon codes for retention marketing, growth marketings to expand customer lifetime value to those to that specific consumer, and allowing them to redeem it wherever you have an engagement with that, with whatever you have engagement with that brand. And you really just kind of harmonizing, a loyalty flow. Like a couple of things we were working on is triggering points 30 days after an order is placed, and then 30 days after that, and setting up reminders to leverage that. A birthday point system. A lot of times brands are manually pulling lists and then sending a code that expires, right? So trying to find ways to automate that is super, super important as it relates to loyalty and harmonizing online and in-store experiences. I think there's definitely opportunity there.
I come from kind of a startup background originally. And our approach would generally be, we're happy to do things manually. In fact, in a lot of these things, we're not even going to bother with the technical side because it's so much quicker, but we test it. And if we like it, then we look to automate. But that was always the key thing. And there were some times when we rejected something because we could see no route to being able to automate and scale that in the future. And if you can't do that, it means, either you run the test, you like it, and you say, well, that's great, but we can't do it anymore. Or you potentially scale it in a quite expensive way. But there's nothing wrong with manually doing it as long as you optimize that eventually at some point and get it going. So, lots of tech platforms, you don't even have to do it manually anymore. The data can link up well enough. So if you capture birthday, you can pass that birthday through, give them points, send them emails.
Yeah, you definitely brought up a good point, and it really depends on your subscriber base that's listening to this podcast, really, and what types of demographics that are involved with that. If we're talking about a lot of brands that are, humble in nature or startup in nature, and, dollars and cents are super, super important to them, and they can't spend the money on certain loyalty solutions like, like a Loyalty Line or Smile.io or Yotpo or something like that, you might have to do it manually. And there's ways that you can optimize, at leveraging tools like, Klaviyo or Digital, and just getting specific pre-built workflows out for those loyalty programs at a very infant level, right? Because you have to have some type of ESP that'll allow you to kind of move in a phased approach, right? So it really depends on where you sit at a brand level and what discretionary funds you have for these marketing technologies. Like we have these percentages in Imagination Media where you should only have 3 to 5% of your annual revenue should be attributed to marketing technology, right? And sometimes that only allows for a couple platforms. Sometimes that allows for 20, right? And putting a priority system in place on how you want to engage with your audience, and having that priority system. So, you probably can't get away without having an ESP of some, in some way, shape, or form, but loyalty could be a phase 2 approach. And there's ways to navigate it. You just really have to have, the flexibility to work with what you have, like to your point, and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you say, you don't have to have a loyalty program. You can still reward people. Even if it's as simple as saying when someone places their third order, trigger a coupon code or something via Klaviyo. I don't think you need anything extra to be able to do that. You might be able to do things on value as well. Once you've spent $100, you get some sort of reward or something.
It definitely sounds like you're from the startup world where yeah. It makes a lot of sense, right? Because you have to just you can't spend yourself rich, right? You just have to be really mindful about where your dollars and cents are going, because operating online is not cheap, right? And you can spend a ton of money in the blink of an eye. And there's a lot of different ways of, keeping a healthy cash flow, in check, really. So I definitely can understand, because I've resonated with the SMB market as well as the mid market. So tailoring to that audience relative to what their needs are key. And I just try to help them, leverage the technology that's digestible for them, for the functionality, what you can use today versus tomorrow, and so forth.
Yeah, I like the point you made earlier, actually, about not being able to redeem points in store. You see, a lot of the bigger brands you can. Like here we've got Tesco's, not quite the same, but I think their club card works online, offline, in the same way. I guess Holland and Barrett's probably the one that comes to mind, where they do a loyalty program. They're very keen to push it in store as well, and they give you a card, not a card, like a fob to go on your keys, as well as a card, and they do link that up, and they do loads of promotions. But there's plenty of stores who do probably have online loyalty programs, and you're right, like a handful of stores, might be 2 or 3, could be 5. But it's, they've got their loyalty program through, I don't know, Loyalty Line or someone. And I don't actually know if they don't offer in store, but generally there is no link up, and probably not even a mention of it.
I mean, that's why we've leveraged Teamwork Commerce, and they're in EMEA. I mean, predominantly they're a North American brand that's had quite a bit of success globally at this point, with like Uniqlo, Robert Graham, Alexander Wang, Theory. I mean, they're all over. But one of the reasons why they've leveraged that solution is because it's like Apple. Apple built software and hardware in unison. And what Teamwork Commerce has done is provided a point of sale system that connects its data to its order management system. So it's easier for you to, leverage that data in a customer centric view, where you could start, leveraging those types of solutions, from customer loyalty and stuff like that.
Cool. So just out of interest, if a business didn't have stores but wanted to run pop-ups, would Teamwork Commerce would that be a good solution for them? Or are they more, you need dedicated stores because the point of sale system needs to be in place for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's 2 degrees of separation from that statement, right? Where I think the pop-up stores might be good with maybe, I don't know, like a Square or something that's just ready to go. And then you can just turn it on and turn it off, and you don't have any more, because Teamwork Commerce is really kind of built for more established brands that have multiple storefronts, like the Yetis of the world. What's that? It's not Canada Goose, but what's the Moose Knuckles, like stuff like that, are brands that are really trying to, operate on that global level. So, maybe they will change their model, but, for more of the established brands, you could leverage that solution. But, as you can imagine, right, there's a ton of POS, systems out there you can switch on and switch off if all you're trying to do is a pop-up, right?
Yeah, definitely. Do you see any big trends coming in the way businesses change that online experience then? Because we've talked about that, the offline and the pop-up that you mentioned around engaging people, giving them a haircut, giving them a drink or whatever, almost like a concierge sort of experience, I suppose, in store. What do you see coming up in the online side to create those better experiences online?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, from the agency side, you kind of get a nice holistic grasp of what brands are trying to accomplish. And as you can imagine, every 6-12 months that changes because the technology is updated or transformed in some way. One would be progressive web apps, right? And it's really just leveraging technology to have a native application. And, really you can turn any website into a PWA. And you can do it, I'd say relatively quickly. And it's, I'd say it's pretty comprehensive in its nature. And, you can leverage all types of features with it, within that native solution, like push notifications, offline support, much more. Everyone knows Twitter, right? You can visit that site on your smartphone and you can install it on your home screen. Now, when you open the saved Twitter site, you'll notice that it looks and performs just like a native app. There's no browser window or anything like that. So essentially, there's no difference in, using an Android or an iPhone. You simply just log in, you're good to go. And that's really a major benefit of leveraging a web app with PWA in mind. So I definitely noticed some adoption there, and a lot of, solutions like Adobe. Adobe's leveraging PWA in a pretty strong way. And we've done that for, a couple brands over here at Imagination Media. And then once you're on the platform and you have the website up and you're trying to improve the customer experience, the other two things that stands out to me is augmented reality, virtual reality. Like I was working with a jewelry brand just the other day that's kind of going through the solutions in the market, 3Kit, ATL. I think Tanglebee. There's a bunch of them. Lavar.io. And they're looking at product sizing comparisons, stacking jewelry pieces, having an option to stack one or more. Can you stack it in the same order or varying combinations? I think Kendra Scott's done a pretty good job from an AR, VR perspective in that vertical. Virtual try-ons. So the jewelry space is pretty important. It's a super high average order value, 4 or 5 figure type of things. And it's an emotional purchase as it relates to jewelry, right? So if you can find ways of having a product size comparison or stacking it or a virtual try-on, I think that would ultimately decrease in returns because it has such a strong emotional connection. And if you can almost feel it and touch it, I think that is kind of the 2 degrees of separation that wasn't formally there before AR and VR came on. And the same thing would go with furniture. And furniture is a huge thing right now of AR and VR. You do have to convert your images from econ photography to have it as in maybe like a CAD model, or have a 3D rendering component. And then, there is a software fee. And I think depending on what your vertical is, those two, if you have discretionary income, would decrease your returns. And it would increase your engagement and decrease your bounce rate on your website. For sure. There's no question there for those two verticals. And especially for furniture, like think about it. What if everybody's got their measuring tape before they buy something in the store? And you could almost take them a bit seriously when they walk into a furniture store with a measuring tape. You know that they're ready to buy, right? Yeah. But let's say you're online and you're sitting in your kitchen and, hey, I want my dining room table to fit. So let's see if I can, leverage my iPad to overlay that, what that would look like in there. And it's super expensive to ship for furniture. Sometimes it's freight, in terms of the delivery methods. And they don't want to, risk having stuff coming back and forth from, the warehouse.
Pretty sure IKEA are doing loads in the AR AR space. I think they launched a new app about a year or so ago. And they've always been the kind of business that you'd expect to be kind of running with that and be in the forefront. But what I found interesting last year, at some point, was I was looking at a jewelry site, and it was a relatively small business, I think. The website didn't seem very, very modern. But at one point, I came across this function where you could select, it was a particular type of jewelry. It might have been a watch or a bracelet. And it had an image of an arm with the watch on it, and you could change the skin tone, which I thought was really, really, really clever, because that probably is something that a lot of people consider. They'll want a certain type of metal or something because it complements their skin. But it was the first time I'd ever seen something like that used on a jewelry store. And it just surprised me that it was this, what I'm assuming is quite a small store that I'd never really heard of before. So, it's stuff like that will work really well. And with on the furniture side, I remember when I bought my flat originally, the developers provided me with a 3D plan of the flat, but the plan came with like furnishings. So the idea was to show me what my flat is supposed to look like when it's built, because I bought it off plan. And I look back at it now, and I'm so glad I didn't use that model to actually plan the layout of my flat and the furniture I bought, because it was all over the place, well off. Yeah. But the ability now to, in fact, there's an app a friend sent me, but the ability to kind of build out that flat, almost like in The Sims, actually. If you could basically turn The Sims into a tool, build the outline, the floor plan, and then go to a website like John Lewis, IKEA, Furniture Village, or whatever. Start picking their products out and just adding it to this floor plan. That'd be amazing, because you'd map it all out. You'd be able to see the gaps in between all the different pieces of furniture, so you can walk around it all and stuff. And then all you've got to do is add it to bag and ship it. But each time I've bought furniture, I've gone to the store. I've spent ages searching online, found the one I want, and then I've gone in store to check it.
Yeah, I mean, furniture is one of those things, right? It's a bit challenging to get people, especially, like my parents' generation that are, in their 70s, to get away from the brick and mortars, to have confidence to leverage, online experiences and to improve that. I think it's kind of an extreme analogy, but it's like having a plane land by itself without a pilot. You know what I mean? It's like, where's that comfort level that a person can entrust a brand that it's going to fit, it's going to look the way that it should. and I can insert that experience in a way that builds trust, transparency, credibility, and I guess you could say accountability into that transaction, so they don't actually have to go into the store. I don't think we're totally there yet, but I think the younger generation's more adopted to it.
Well, we've got tools as well, like Fit Finder and TrueFit, where you kind of fill in your measurements. You create an account, you fill in your measurements, and then on these sites you can log into your TrueFit account or Fit Finder, and it will give you an idea of which size of the piece of clothing you should buy. And it will say, oh, on this site for this product, we recommend you buying a large, and on another site it might be a medium. That sort of stuff's really good because, again, it really reduces that return rate because you're actually getting the right product in the first place.
Yeah, I'd say apparel is definitely included in that, that Fit Finder, that personalized experience as well. And it ultimately kind of relates to this post-purchase strategy. And we actually built a post-purchase solution. We're a global system integrator. We build websites. We do outsource CTO, outsource CMO. We do growth marketing. We do, retention marketing, conversion rate optimization. One thing that we've learned is that post-purchase is actually a totally underutilized area where everyone's getting tracking codes from UPS, USPS, DHL, FedEx, and all the other types of shipping carriers in the UK, where you get this like ambiguous tracking link, and it's not on brand, and it's not, communicating in a way that is continuing that brand narrative post-purchase. For example, your order tracking CMS landing page. It's just a bunch of different scans that come from the carrier, right? Why not transform that and leverage your brand, leverage capture forms for opt-ins for email so you can convert that customer from a transactional email experience to, putting them into their nurture campaigns so they can leverage loyalty and what have you. What about leveraging product upsells, cross sells, right? You got the hat, now you need the scarf, right? On that order tracking confirmation page. It's real estate that is totally underutilized, and it literally is like someone's cutting a piece of paper down right in the middle. They purchase something, and you just kind of lose the brand, right? So we built a company called Relaycloud Io. It's really just a post-purchase customer platform designed from a merchant requirement. So not only can we solution the business problems, but we can solution it to other merchants as well. We brought it to market in that fashion. And you can, return stuff and get a gift card. You can have product SKUs on rules on what you want to allow or deny, or submit for a request, and automate that entire experience. And I think that was an area that, maybe came about with like the Narvars and the Returnlys of the market, but they're super expensive. It's an old platform, and it hasn't really kind of evolved in a way to not only make it digestible in price, but to have, the integrations that it needs for an e-commerce brand to, improve that experience. Like we've seen huge improvements. We've seen 60% of decreased of customer service inquiries for our brand Catbird NYC. It's a jewelry brand that Meg Markle wore on her wedding day. Could you imagine what that would do, right? Just from a customer service experience perspective. Think about what it would do from shipping something back and you have to manually update, all these systems. Well, we're streamlining that entire back order process. Like Catbird had 3 full-time employees receiving packages and having to open it up and then finding the order, scanning it, and bringing it back in. Well, all you have to do now is we provide you the RMA code. They scan it, it updates the system, and it's done. So it helps for the consumer and the merchant because that's an expensive process. So I'd say there's a huge opportunity there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard a lot about that recently, actually. Stores, particularly stores who have free returns policies, it basically encourages people to order more than they need because they either test it, don't like it, send it back, or they've got no intention of keeping it. Actually, they do it for the quick Instagram photo, send it back, and then there's a massive issue with restocking. What do you do with that product? And I think a lot of the companies ditch the product pretty much, or send it to an outlet store or something, and basically write it off. So there's definitely opportunities there. I appreciate we're kind of running out of time. So do you have any pet peeves when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, no worries. I'd say, just missing the unified commerce boat and not leveraging the data from all those channels and having excessive messaging or automated messaging or stuff that's not personalized. Like there was an email platform I'm thinking about using here for Imagination Media, and I got 4 automated touch points in 6 hours. And it was not even for what I was trying to do. And it was driving me crazy. So I reached out to the rep just saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I'm interested in using your solution, but not based off of what this messaging is trying to tell me. And I think it comes down to some brands think that they know their customers when they really don't. And they didn't take the time to plan, test, and reiterate. So I think where brands fall short is where they make that assumption on limited data sets.
Yeah. I think my particular pet peeve with that is when I download an ebook or a white paper or something, and within hours get a phone call from a salesperson. And I'm not downloading an ebook is not me saying, let's have a demo. I'm really interested in your product. It's telling you I have an interest in that space. You've hopefully put together an interesting ebook. I've seen it popping up on Twitter actually as something that annoys people a lot. So yeah, just before we end then, is there any particular area of marketing that you think is quite underrated?
I mean, branding's huge, right? So I'd say copywriting is paramount, how it relates to your branding. So for example, a lot of brands focus on paid media, Google search, SEM marketing, but they don't take the time to put in place the correct content and have those systems to tell you about that audience. So a lot of times, if it's poor content, a lot of it can be attributed to poor copywriting. And, a lot of brands, they'll just dump a lot of money into AdWords and they won't do competition research, or their email campaigns are off. So it's off branding. And, it's like the CBD brand we just launched. It is a athletic lifestyle brand for anything for pain, anxiety, and I'd say pain and anxiety. So that relates to physical athletes, right? That relates to anyone going to the gym and they feel sore, or, the uncertain state of the world right now of anxiety towards, personal or professional issues. I'm relating to a pretty large segment there. But if I just say that I have a CBD brand for anyone, that's the first mistake you're going to make, right? If it's not targeted towards women for the motherly CBD. I forget the name of that brand, but they're doing a pretty good job. They're gonna make more sales than the other CBD guy that's trying to sell it to everybody, because ultimately that narrative doesn't resonate with anyone, right? So it's a bit challenging from an advertising perspective in the hemp space at the moment, but I'd say, those are kind of some of my closing comments as it relates to pet peeves when it comes to marketing, and where brands may fall short, and where they need to think twice maybe.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. It's either brands who have a product which can work for anyone, and choose to message that, which doesn't work, or brands that even sometimes have a product which has quite a specific pain point that it targets, but they just don't message it and they don't get those points across. And you're always going to struggle against someone who puts the right words in place, because those words are the ones that will convince the customer to actually buy the product.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been really great stuff. Really interesting to hear about unified commerce, because it's not something that I'd really heard much of before. If people want to get in touch, find out more, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, thanks, William, for having me on. I really appreciate it. I probably spend more time on LinkedIn than I should, but you can find me James Denker Jr., Denker. That's one place where you can find me. If you want to chat, feel free to send me an email at james@imaginationmedia.com. And I'd say those are probably the best two channels.
Awesome. Thanks so much, James. Having all this data linked together is so important and so helpful. You can far more easily engage your customers in relevant ways if you've got all the data and all their touch points. Simple things like being able to time a review email based off the fulfillment date can make a big difference. By linking everything up, you can also start to break down some of the walls that appear between or around certain departments. It makes sense. So you'd want to know the customer is currently in a complaints process before sending them an email. But most companies just don't link this data to their email platform, and so will quite often email someone despite them having a problem. If you'd like to learn more about unified commerce, just reach out to James on LinkedIn. As always, please email me at will@customerswhoclick.com or tweet me your thoughts, and I'll get back to you ASAP. Next up, I've got Joseph Wilkins with me. We're going to be talking about how companies of any type can be using humor-based sales videos to generate fantastic growth. But until then, keep those customers clicking.